Good morning. Welcome to Reading Swizzle. I am so delighted today to introduce you to the author, Louise Selby. Louise has written several books, but the one we're talking about today is all about dyslexia. This book is so important for parents, teachers, and caregivers. It is one of the most practical guides I have ever read about dyslexia. And we have science of reading laws here in the United States in many of the states. However, the 18 hours required by our state and some others, I feel maybe it doesn't give enough practicality to teachers where this book absolutely does. Let me start by saying I loved your dedication. I dedicate this book to my mom, Rosemary, whose writing talent inspired us all, and her sister, Sandra, my most avid supporter. And this is the line I love. Their relentless commitment to learning will never be forgotten.
Oh,
I hope that one day, the same can be said about all of us educators who are trying to turn the trajectory for children.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that introduction, Mary. That's made me quite emotional actually, because you saying that it's the most practical book about dyslexia you've ever read. That's a huge compliment because there's a lot of books about dyslexia, and especially from someone. Obviously, you're working in the States, and I wrote it in the UK, but it's not rocket science, is it? It's not to support these children and to help them to learn. It's not you don't need to have hours and hours of specialist teaching and really expensive provisions. It's just things that you can do in class, ways that you can teach, and that's what I wanted. I want all children to learn. I don't want them to need really expensive programs and tutoring. That's great if they can have that, but in the state school, in class, I want them all to learn the best way that they can and flourish and thrive. So yeah, you mentioned my mum and my auntie, both of whom passed away during my mum passed away just before the book was submitted, and her sister passed away during the editing process, and they were both such avid lovers of words and language and also learning. Yeah, they weren't
Mm,
both educators, but really committed to learning.
I
Yeah.
love. And this is what I think, not everyone has the time to be highly trained like you and I. Although I believe that the highly trained education really helps deliver appropriate evidence-based instruction. But
Mm.
this literacy problem is worldwide, and your book is offers so many great things. For example, first of all, everyone needs to buy this book because it's evidence-based, it's practical. It Louise incorporates the voices of parents and learners in this book, along with QR codes. She includes a whole section about collaborating with parents. And when we were discussing this show, we talked about how difficult it is for parents in the US to get services for their children with dyslexia. So this is what I love is that a teacher can buy your book, and we're going to focus on a couple of my favorite sections. Um, a teacher can buy the book, and part two is titled Practical Strategies in the Classroom. So this is what teachers want and need. What would you say to teachers anywhere in the world? What could they do for kids who may not have even been diagnosed yet with dyslexia?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the first thing is, well, where do I start actually? I was going to say don't worry about the label dyslexia. Worry or think about the child and as you mentioned, parents, and the parents, because parents have a lot to tell you. They know a lot, obviously, about their child. So think about the child and what their needs are. Don't worry about, well, this is they might be dyslexic, I have to do this, because sometimes that can lead to the wrong strategy. Actually, think about what they need to learn, and think about with dyslexic type difficulties, I think the first part of that section, that part 2 section, is strategies across the curriculum. So if you can think about some of the issues for children with dyslexia and other types of neurodiversity. So there's there's working memory there's working memory problems often, and there's processing speed problems often, and then there's literacy difficulties often. And if you can think about a child who's struggling with that working memory, it's holding things in your head whilst working on it. Particularly in dyslexia, it's that verbal working memory, so the verbal information that's coming at you quickly and you're being asked to do so many things all at once. If you can think about relieving that load for the child in what you're doing, reducing your instructions, giving things in chunks, giving things visually or kinesthetically, that's a really good thing. Also to think about, that processing speed, and you said, Mary, yet the book, I did make a point for the book of talking to, because I don't have dyslexia, but I do know an awful lot of people who do, and I work with a lot of people who do. So I talked to people and asked children what it's like, and there's a lot of quotes from them, including some videos. That's the QR codes that you've mentioned. But some of these children just said to me, well, I just I wish the teacher would know, I just want them to slow down. I just want more time. I can do it. If I don't get it done, it's not because I can't do it, it's because I need more time. And if you have a slower processing speed, you just need more time. It's not that you can't do things. And so often, I don't know about the States, but here, we're so rushed, the curriculum's so busy, the timetable's so busy. So that's the second thing. And then with the literacy difficulties, it's thinking, in the big wide world, how much are we measured by our spelling and our writing? In some jobs we are, but in others we aren't. And yet we measure so much in school by spelling and writing, don't we? And I suppose it's that we need them to learn to spell and write and read, and they can learn, as you said, given the right strategies and preferably by specialists. But also we need to relieve that load. So if you're teaching science, do you need them to write sentences? Can you find alternatives for them to show their knowledge? Can you ask them to make videos, to do an oral presentation, whatever it is, but try to reduce that literacy load. There's a lot of strategies in the book about how to do that, and maybe we'll come to that, but it's just thinking about those principles. And the other thing is, and especially as you get to the upper primary, and there is a secondary book as well, which we can come to in another podcast if you want to, but thinking about reading and how reading is challenging anyway, but it's also joy giving. But across the curriculum, reading is quite different. And so if you're in a history lesson, teaching history, the kind of words that you're asking them to read, the kind of text types that you're asking them to read are different. And so being aware of that load, I think, is really important. I suppose, when it comes to primary education and again, it'd be interesting to hear what happens in the States, but I would say that here, one of the most important things is getting the child on the right level of books. And that's often missed. And in primary school, we want them to learn to read and then to practice what they're learning in books at that level. We don't want to throw books that are way too hard at them, because then it's just frustrating, isn't it? So finding their reading level and making sure that you have reading material for them to practice on. We're often with dyslexia, you can understand more than you can decode. And so they might seem to be progressing through the reading, and they might be reading books that actually they can't decode. I don't know if that happens in the States, Mary. Is that?
This is one question I had for you, Louise. So in the UK, so I'm a big believer in providing people with dyslexia with decodable readers
Mhm.
and also non-controlled text. But I believe in every classroom, when students are learning the code, they have to have books in which they've been taught those instructional principles. Do you use decodable books in the
Yeah.
UK?
Yes. So just to clarify, when you say instructional principles, do you mean apart from decoding, or do you mean purely decoding?
Well, the morphology. So if they've been, the focus is prefixes or Latin bases. Are they given text or they can practice those skills?
Yeah, so we've come a long way in the UK, and we've had synthetic phonics in place since, gosh, about 2005, 2006, and we've been teaching that pretty well. And I would say that is impacting children's learning. The decodable readers, we've had them on the fringe, but decodable reading books didn't really come in here until we had a government initiative, gosh, 2021. And that was when there's an initiative where schools must be following a government endorsed phonics program, and that must include decodable readers. And that's good, because obviously we want children to read books at the level that they are learning. And in the early stages of reading, it's mostly phonics. And we're teaching them word attack. We're teaching them how to, or, structured systematic phonics, and we want them to practice it. What I still find, and I do think this is across the country, well, there's a few things that I find. One is that where dyslexia is concerned and reading difficulties, you need lots and lots and lots of practice and overlearning. You don't just read one decodable book and then move on to the next level. And there aren't enough. There aren't enough books. That's one problem. So we need to be making a lot more at each level for this to work. The other problem is that where teaching is not perhaps as successful as we want, and children have persistent difficulties, that's what dyslexia is. They can reach maybe age 8, 9, and they're still reading books at the level of a 5, 6-year-old, and they're too babyish and they lose interest. So that's a problem that needs addressing, and there are some book providers that have addressed that, and they've produced decodable books which are more age appropriate, some really lovely ones coming out. I think the other problem, though, that we have, and I wrestle with this, so I'm interested because, and I have, as you probably know, I have written a book that's based on morphology and using morphology in a systematic way through intervention, and morphology being, for your listeners that aren't familiar, being prefixes, roots, and suffixes, so units of meaning rather than units of sound, which is what phonics is. I suppose I find that if you have children who struggle with phonics, and maybe because of their dyslexia and because of the way their brain is wired, they they have weak phonological awareness. That's their weakness. And even though they have been taught phonics brilliantly, it doesn't come fluently, and they become frustrated. I see them sounding out every word. And then the other side of that is that children who maybe struggle with what we call orthographic processing. So they're struggling with remembering visual letter patterns. They might be really good at decoding words, but they don't commit it to their long-term memory. And so again, it's not fluent. And those readers, I find they come to are, I apologize about my dog. He's pretending to be a very fierce guard dog, but he's a tiny little, sorry about that.
No,
Making his voice heard.
I have three here with me. Three.
With those readers, I often find they get to age 10, age 9, and they hate phonics. And this isn't right, it's not good, but it's very hard for to give them a decodable text, and for them to feel engaged. And so I do think it's important to have texts that have, that have a range of strategies. I'm teaching a boy who's very severe, I mean, severely dyslexic. We don't really use that term, but persistent, persistent reading difficulties. And he's done a lot of phonics, done it again and again and again. And we've done it in different ways and really multisensory. But he he's doing reading some decodable books, but he's also reading some books that have familiar words and patterns, and it's motivating him, because of the content and the interest. So I think, that there's a place for both, but I'm pleased to say that we do have decodables here. Are you finding that's not so much the case in the States?
Well, it's so first of all, I want to say I completely agree with you that we need decodable and non-controlled text. So regular books. So with all the students with whom I work, we always have a non-controlled text, and that's usually read aloud by me. But the kids are actively highlighting and marking up their own copy of the book. So
Mm.
they learn vocabulary, they learn language comprehension. And
Yeah,
and then I asked them to maybe try to read out loud a little bit too. So I
yeah,
agree with you there. Decodable books, I believe, are pretty mainstream here in the US, but I'm not sure that they're in every school, every classroom. And I think that's what needs to be done. And I also encourage parents to lobby for decodable readers for the public library system. So they can go in and just say, hey, this is where my kid is reading, and I'd love some decodable books because it builds such great confidence.
yeah, yeah. It does. And if it's done well, I think it's exactly that. It's knowing what level the children are at and having a range of books at that level, rather than just giving them phonic books, because actually it can be counterproductive if they have a book at the wrong level. I've seen that with all types of books. If books are at the wrong level and we're asking children to decode them and to read them, it just leads to frustration. And that's the issue. There are some that have come out. So what we have, and I have produced a catalogue of these actually in the UK, of books which we call higher interest, lower level. So they're still graded and leveled, but they're of a higher interest. And some of those are not particularly decodable. They're just at that level, but some of them are. And that there's one set that's come out from Ransom Publishing. I don't know if you have them there, but one set of, oh God, I think they're called Powerphonics, but and they're really lovely because they're purely decodable, but they also use the language patterns and the morphology that we would expect those children to be using at that stage. And they're also interesting enough for older children to read. So those are great. But yeah, it's a tricky one. I do, in something, if you have parents listening, um, I suppose the thing is not to pressure children, or not to feel pressured for children to move up until they're ready, and to make sure that they're reading the books you're asking them to read, not the ones you're reading with them, as you've described, but the books you're asking them to read are at their level. It really can make a big difference, and that's for educators as well. I often see children in school reading books that are way too hard for them, and just taking it back, stripping it back, finding books that are interesting but easier can be just what they need to move on.
Thank you, Louise. I have marked up my book. Whenever I see Oprah talking about a book, she always has numerous post-it notes. So I have post-it notes. So this is on page 25 in your book. The
Yeah.
tasks in school, which place a high demand on working memory. So this is the cognitive load theory. Am I right? So
Yeah, yeah.
the things that are difficult for kids in school with these language processing disorders. So teachers, I think that this bulleted checklist is really good. It helps you to tune in when the child is on overload. So that
Yeah.
was such a practical a thing too. Now, I also have in the part two, practical strategies for the classroom,
Mhm.
you write about maximizing talking opportunities
Ah,
and
yeah.
using speaking frames. And
Yeah.
I think the speaking frames could be revolutionary in primary levels. How
Yeah.
do you see them working?
Yeah, speaking frames. I worked with English bilingual learners for a while in learning support, and speaking frames were a big thing in that field because it's just structuring talk because children were learning how to speak English. And we know that talking and language, communication feeds into literacy. We know that it works the other way around too, but we know that the writing process, the sequence for writing starts with talking. But I think, and we do support children with their speaking and listening, and we do support them with their language. But I think what we don't do perhaps as much is helping them to structure their own talking. And so for a child to just suddenly say, right, talk about your ideas for 5 minutes, that can be really hard. Or talk about what you've done, especially when you're hungry and you want dinner and you want to talk about the football and you haven't seen your friend for, you haven't talked to them yet. You don't want to talk about what you're going to do. So to give a structure, and that's all that a speaking frame is. I've got the page open and there are some examples. They are downloadable as well on my website, but honestly, they're not rocket science. So one simple one, which is for much younger children, is questions, and this will be for science. One, what did you do? What did you find out? What would you do differently next time? And to have those questions that children actually ask each other, rather than just saying talk to a partner, get them to answer those questions each other, and then that can lead into their writing, rather than have a chat about lunch and the football and then let's write about something we've forgotten about. And these speaking frames can be used across the curriculum, and they can be anything. It's just a way to structure how you want them to talk, structure their language, which is going to feed into their writing.
Beautiful. I think that's one simple thing that all classroom teachers could use that would benefit everyone. I also love this point. You write, organize your own delivery. Whether this is a Venn diagram, table, mind map, or flowchart, chunking information in steps is helpful. And I love the whole idea of the flowchart and the mind mapping, which you also give an example of in this part of the book, pages 38 and 39. Why is it important for teachers to organize delivery, and how does that impact learning?
Well, the first reason is that teachers tend to be quite what's the word? Is the word verbose? I don't know if that
Yes.
teachers tend to like talking, don't they? And I was once told I'm verbose, so I can say that of others. Um, and 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 we can be quite reactive and responsive because we're so aware of the class around us. But for working memory difficulties, and we know with memory and with cognitive load, we know that the more something is organized and the more it's in chunks, the more it's meaningful, the easier it is to take it in. And so if I just give you lots of random ideas, that's going to be harder for me to put into my frame of learning. But if I can organize it in a particular way. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be that you plan a script, but just to think about what am I going to say, and can I give numbers to help structure my talk? Can I give it in a picture? That the mind map, that's a visual way, isn't it, of presenting information. It's just a way to help and relieve cognitive load. And I just think that teachers, you know, we do go on quite a lot, don't we? We do talk too much, and we do sometimes use fluffy language and too much language. And perhaps we are so responsive to the class around us that we don't necessarily think about structuring our talk.
I love that. You also write about tapping into the multisensory. So it's effective for all children. Use visual aids and pictures, which can be even created quickly. And I think when we're talking about vocabulary, pulling up images on these smart boards that are in classrooms. But tell me how you view multisensory teaching and learning.
Yeah, I mean, there's a there's a myth really that multisensory is only done in the earlier years. Really, it needs to be done throughout learning, just in an age appropriate way. So, the more we can use manipulatives, for example, visual aids. It's hard to come up with a visual aid all the time, but even just showing examples of things, or if you really don't have a visual to hand, do some visualizing with your learners. So just get them to visualize themselves doing something. I talk about that as it's a good memory strategy, because often with dyslexia, you struggle with the verbal and the auditory, but sometimes you're good at visualizing. And so if you want them to remember an instruction, ask them to maybe shut their eyes and rehearse themselves doing it and visualize themselves doing that. That can be multisensory because you're visualizing, even if you don't have a material to hand. But the more you can have anything just to make it more tactile, more multisensory, using actions, there's lots of different ways here that we use to make writing a bit more kinesthetic. Taught for writing, Pi Corbett's. Do you have that out there? Pi Corbett's Taught for Writing. It's really where we have actions for learning. I mean, it's brilliant. Definitely recommend looking it up. But actions for remembering stories and embedding language patterns, and then doing story mapping with pictures. Talking is multisensory. So asking children to say what they're going to write is because it's tactile. Spelling, asking them to say a spelling is instantly tactile. If you can use the tactile letters, even better, if you can give them some tactile letters to practice their spelling. But just as much as you can, it really does help with learning and memory retention. We tend to be really auditory, don't we? But it's just taking the load away from that, I think.
Will you tell me the title of that book and for our listeners one more time, if you don't mind repeating the title?
So it's actually not a book. I mean, Pi Corbett is the creator of Talk for Writing, and he has a website, and he has a system and approach to learning writing that you can be trained in. I'm sure he does have some books as well, but if you look up Talk for Writing, Pi, P-I-E, and then Corbett, C-O-R-B-E-T-T.
Thank
Yeah.
you, please. Thank you. I love this also. It's number 7 on page 36. Create different ways of recording and assessing ideas. We have this as part of our law. It's called Universal Design for Learning.
Yeah.
And it's part of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. But I don't know how often it's employed in schools. So having students represent their knowledge in different ways. I remember in high school, my biology teacher had us make a model of a cell, and we had to incorporate all the parts of the cell. And to this day, I can tell you what mitochondria do.
Oh, wow.
Because she had us, I took a sea sponge to make my cell, and then
Mhm.
all these other little things and label them. But we had to also explain it to the rest of the class. But that has stuck with me and
Yeah.
all these decades later.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting because I think it's in the secondary book, but I have actually used the cell diagram as an example because it was actually my son's first homework from when he went to secondary school, and he came home. I'm sure the teacher gave him more than this, but he came home and said, "I need to learn the cell diagram." And I said, "Well, what do you mean by learn it? Do you mean learn what it means, learn the words, learn how to spell it, learn how to label it?" And he didn't really know, but we spent some time exactly that with we looked at the pictures and to try and remember the different parts. He thought of what they looked like. So he said that mitochondria looks mighty, looks big. Um, and he said that the nucleus looks a bit like Santa Claus. Um,
Oh,
to use, and he said that the ribosomes look like ribs, and so he remembered that because of the ribs. And so he was using different strategies for memory. But yeah, to answer your question, I just, so when I was interviewing people for the book, so many people said to me it just seemed really unfair that everything is judged and evaluated on writing and spelling and memory. What can you remember in a short space of time and in an exam? And the thing is, who really has to be judged that way? Not many people in the real world. So we really do need to change a little bit and think if we're not judging writing, which obviously we have to judge writing in English, but if we're not judging writing, why do we have to give them written assessments? Why can't we give them different types of assessments, speaking, presenting, finding out what they know in different ways? Obviously, we're tied a little bit to exam boards, but the more we can celebrate those different types of learning, the more our learners are going to flourish, aren't they?
I agree.
Um, Yeah, yeah, it's just I remember some of my lessons. I mean, I'm too old really to to mention my age, but I remember some of my history lessons, and the teacher just told us what happened and we wrote it down, and that was that. And I look back now and I think I wish I'd been able to engage with that and think about all those historical themes and analyze and compare and do presentations and really understand it rather than just make notes. I think another thing actually that I'd love to see begin in primary school is to teach children how to take notes, how to write things down apart from just in sentences. We teach them prose and sentences and text types, but when they get to secondary, they suddenly have to do a lot of note taking. We don't really teach it, and it doesn't necessarily come innately, and particularly with dyslexics, it's hard to if you have to take notes about something, you've got to think about it and you've got to summarize it, haven't you? You're not just writing down all the sentences that someone's saying. So I wish that we would show children, using post-it notes, using sticky labels, using pictures, using highlighters, just show them how to make some notes in ways that are meaningful to them right from the start of learning. I think we can do that.
Excellent, excellent suggestion. Great. And I also want to mention to the people listening that people with dyslexia are very intelligent. So they have all of this storehouse of knowledge that just hasn't been unlocked because we're living in this literate society. So when I'm working with learners, I am so amazed by their background knowledge and what they know. And I think you're absolutely right. If schools would ask them to present their knowledge in different ways, they would absolutely be able to check every box. One of the other things we did with middle schoolers, and I worked with two great teachers, but we did learning simulations. So we did a learning simulation for immigrants coming into Ellis Island. We did one for the Civil War. And for older kids, that's a really great way to make history come alive and help them own it. Okay, so I love these teachers. Listen up. Louise has support working memory and processing speed. Her first bullet point, always begin lessons with a review of previous learning and prioritize the use of plenaries throughout the lesson, not just at the end to support memory. We've already talked about visual and kinesthetic. Um, she says, avoid asking learners to miss break time. They should
Oh,
never have to, they never should have to leave uh, recess or miss it altogether or break time. Why is this
yeah.
so important?
Yeah, it's so, and I've made a little film about this actually that you can have a look. It's free. It's on my website. It's called Zeb's Day, and it's about what it's like to have working memory difficulties, and also, processing speed difficulties, and to experience cognitive load. And Zeb, Zeb gets up in the morning, and as soon as he's up, there's all this information being bombarded at him. A lot of it is verbal, and his working memory's put to the test even before breakfast, never mind the first lesson in school. And then often with working memory difficulties, sometimes you're slower because you're taking it in. If you have processing speed difficulties as well, and you're exhausted, Zeb in this film is absolutely exhausted. Quite often by the afternoon, they might be playing the class clown a little bit as well because they just can't attend and can't take it in. So what they need is break time. What they absolutely need is their break to reset, to recharge, just to catch up a bit. And also, keeping children in to finish work, if they have slower processing speed, that's actually discrimination. Because why should they lose their break because of their disability? We need to amend the task. We need to make a task that they can finish, that's reasonable to ask them to finish. Obviously, if they haven't been attending and they've been really quite silly during lesson, then deal with that. But please don't make them miss break time. They need it, those kids. They need their break time. Yeah.
This is another thing I love about your book. First, it's so graphically appealing. So on page 41, Louise writes quick wins. So she summarizes the information.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here are some easy prep-free ideas for teaching dyslexic learners across the curriculum that you can do straight away. And she has these wonderful, um, uh, like cartoons of herself with speech bubbles. Quick win one, number one,
Yeah.
use a talking activity strategically. And it goes on to page 42, and it continues with the graphic of Louise on her bicycle with these speech bubbles. And you can read it literally within 15 seconds.
Yeah, I did those graphics myself, and that, of course, they're lovely colourful paintings which don't come out in the book, but that I use them in my training as well. But yeah, I wanted to create something that busy teachers and, well, in this country they're Senko special needs coordinators can use, but also, at the beginning and at the end, there's these bite-sized chunks. It'd be great if you can read the whole book, but if you can't, the beginning, I've known some Senkos to use the beginning bits, which are top tips. So there's top tips at the beginning, which is really your summary of the chapter, and they use them for their staff training. They've been going through them for bite-sized chunks of staff training at staff meetings, a quick 10 minutes look at these top tips. and also the quick wins, because the point of the book is to go and do something. It's not to just read about it and think about it, it's to go and do something. So I've given you at the end of each chapter some things you can go and do straight away. You haven't got to prep or buy resources, and you can just pick a couple of those and go and do them. Read the chapter, go and do them with your class, with your learners. That's the idea. And yeah, they have been popular. I'm thinking about the really busy teacher here. It's full of those little drawings and things that you can do. I had a lot of fun with the artwork, Mary.
I love it. And on pages 64 and 65, Louise has a different book all about morphology. So those units of meaning. But it's so important for all teachers, beginning at the earliest levels, to teach prefixes, suffixes, Latin roots, Greek combining forms. And she shows you how to do it. And I loved her figure 5.7. She has eater, eat is the base, eater with the suffix er, and then eaters, suffix s. But she takes apart words in very easy to read ways that will help you understand what morphology is. So we don't have enough time to do that now. She also goes into mnemonics on page 67, and this will help learners encode random information so it's remembered better.
Yeah.
I love the little cartoons on 68 and 69, the spelling of OULD words.
Yeah, so those are actually from Lydia Stanton's books. If you haven't discovered her books, that with permission by Lydia, she's created these books which are visual mnemonics for tricky spellings, and they're brilliant. You've got some examples there. Actually, although they're great, those books, I often encourage children to make their own, because that's it's more memorable if you create it yourself, because it's more meaningful, even if it doesn't look as beautiful. But Lydia's, they're fantastic. I totally recommend those books.
Oh my gosh, I'm learning so much from you, truly. I just love this conversation, and I know other people will. I'm going to fast forward now to page 99. And I do read a lot, and I feel that I'm an information gatherer. But this
Okay.
active view of reading
Yeah.
by Duke and Cartwright
Yeah.
is this is a new diagram. I don't know how widely available it is in the US, but I encourage everyone to take a look at the active view of reading. You
Mm.
want to talk just for a minute or two about this?
Yeah, so I mean, we know, I don't know how much you are your listeners will be familiar with the different models of reading. So there's the simple view of reading, which is about language processes and decoding, and how both of those are involved in reading. And then there's also the reading rote, Scarborough's reading rote, which is very commonly used to look at. It's an image of a rote with all the different skills that are used in the reading process. And it's great for educators because you can see all the different skills. It's not just knowing the words. But I really liked this one. And there are some papers around with, again, this was with permission from the authors, but it describes the bridging processes, and also, so it's based on the simple view of reading, but it's not simple as the simple view of reading. So you've got your word recognition skills. We need those, and particularly in the early stages of reading, we've talked about phonic decoding and so on, and then there's morphology as well, and just knowing those words. There's also the language comprehension, which is how you respond to a text, how you understand what it's meaning, how you infer, how you deduce, how you summarize, how you compare. But then we also have with reading, I think this is where I think this one resonated with me, because we have a lot of ADHD and attention and concentration problems with learners. And so the actual attending when you're reading, that active self-regulation when you're reading is a real key, I think. And that's on this view of reading, this active self-regulation, and use of strategies, teaching them how to use strategies. And then also the bridging processes, which of course includes morphological awareness. It's not just reading a prefix and a suffix, it's understanding the prefix and the suffix and what they do, and deducing from that. It's like language processes, but at the word level, those bridging processes. So I thought I chose to use that one in that chapter because I think it's a really helpful view of reading. And then, of course, that chapter gives ideas on how to support each area and what the difficulties are within those areas, and how to get them reading actively, not just decoding words. Yeah.
Exactly. And then we only have a few minutes left, Louise. This time has gone so fast, but I want to end with um, two topics that are near to my heart. People, the parents who see their children failing in school and will do anything to help them uh, be able to read and write and enter the literacy club. And I love that you have a whole chapter on how to work with parents and that it has to be collaborative. What do you
Mm.
say to teachers about bridging in or bringing in the parents, and instead of making it so antagonistic when they're asking, I'm just so worried about my child and I would love for my child to read, and sometimes they're told everything's okay, it's all
Yeah.
developmental. Why is it important for educators to work with parents?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's close to my heart as well. I am a parent, and I think so. The books were written. They were written as part of a series which is for educators. And I think if it weren't for that, there'd have been a lot more in there actually for parents. But they were written for educators. But I wanted to put that chapter in both books about how to engage with parents, because as you've said, it's absolutely key. And I think, you know, on the whole, teachers in this country, they don't want to be difficult, and they want to support children, and they want
Absolutely.
the best. There's no question of that. And Senkos want to meet needs and train people up to meet needs. But I think there is a sense sometimes where parents just have their own child, don't they, to think about, and teachers have all of the children in the class to think about, and parents can sometimes be perceived as being demanding. But the thing is, we're missing a trick there. We're missing a trick if we don't listen, because actually parents know their children inside out. And if a parent comes and says there's a problem, there is a problem. It's just about working it out, unpicking it. Very, very often, because I assess for dyslexia as well, and very often it's the parent that comes to me and they will say, well, look, I know something's not right, but the school has just said it's fine, they'll catch up. But it's really not fine if you get to the point where a parent wants to have an assessment and is concerned about dyslexia. It's really not fine. I think, there was a paper actually that was written quite recently, and I've forgotten. I'm going to have to give it to you for your show notes because I've forgotten. I've forgotten the authors, but it's called Being Seen, Seeing, Being Seen, and Being Able to Be Seen. And it's a research paper about dyslexia and about the impact of schools and parents working together, and this sense of being seen. Because so often with dyslexia, I don't know if it's the same. I guess it probably is in the States. It's
Mhm.
not seen, it's not noticed because it doesn't shout loudly always. Children with dyslexia don't usually cause a fuss, don't usually have behavioral problems, aren't, sometimes they're dysregulated, but you know, not always in an obvious way that needs immediate attention, but it very much impacts them, sometimes in an internal way. And we want them to learn to read. And so we need to see them, we need to listen to these parents because they know. And actually, often parents are quite happy to do the research themselves and to bring the resources in and to find out what's going to work if schools would just harness that. And just working alongside and listening. Sometimes a parent just wants to be heard and seen, you
Mm.
know. It's not always that they want to have a big fight and they want to make demands. It's just about being heard and being seen and knowing what's happening for their children. It's just so important, especially in the primary years, but also in the secondary years, actually. Um, so yeah, quite often my role as an assessor would be to be that bridge between the school and the family to help them, you know, to help parents. Sometimes expectations need to be managed a little in what's realistic in a state school, but also to help schools to see what can be done and where the gaps are and where the needs are.
Mm.
Yeah, so important.
Louise Selby, I am so glad that you wrote this book all about dyslexia. I will include the links so that parents and educators can buy this book. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Um,
Oh,
we didn't even get to assistive technology or maths or the dyslexia-friendly learning environment, which I also am so interested in. How do we create a school culture?
yeah.
So,
Well, you know what, on that there's a whole page on my website with all the photos from that chapter, all the photos about dyslexia friendly schools, so you get a better view on the website anyway.
Louise, will you come back?
I'd love to come back. Thank
I
you for
I thank you so much for imparting your wisdom and your experience. And I learned so much from you. And I believe that these strategies, if they're employed and they're quick and easy, that they will change kids' lives. So
yeah.
thank you so much for being part of Reading Swizzle today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Louise.
Bye.